We are now recording, and we will make this virtual boardroom available for download with a link, as well as on YouTube, so that you can also share it with your office and colleagues to get more information out. I'd first like to thank Talal Al-Casey, a friend and colleague for almost 10 years now, as well as the UAE Space Agency, for agreeing to present today. We have a very broad as well as multifaceted presentation today. The topic is a global picture of the space industry and the UAE's journey within. Part 1 will focus on why space. Part 2 will be the UAE's journey into space. Part 3 will be the global picture, demystifying the stigma. Part 4, and one of the most interesting in today's times, are COVID-19, space impact on COVID and COVID impact on space. The presenter, many of you know, and many of you have also known how active have been not only in UAE relations, but now as part of the UAE Space Agency. Talal Al-Casey is the advisor for strategic projects. Talal joined the UAE Space Agency in September of 2018 as an advisor to the Director General on strategic projects. Among several duties, one of his core focus functions is supporting the activation of the UAE Space Agency investment, promotion plan, and the development of a holistic national space economy with an emphasis on attracting space startups and investments to the UAE. Additionally, Talal provides strategic support to both the Policy and Regulatory Directorate, as well as Space Missions Management Directorate. Talal was recently appointed as the UAE representative to the World Economic Forum Council on Space Technology. And prior to this role at the UAE Space Agency, Talal served the UAE Embassy in Washington, D.C. for 9 years as a senior advisor for commercial affairs at the UAE Trade and Commercial Office, and also led the U.S. UAE Space Affairs engagement. The role entailed bilateral trade policy and commercial issues to advance the UAE's space interests in the US and attract FDI, foreign direct investment, in the UAE. On the space affairs front, Talal worked closely with the UAE Space Agency to work together a framework agreement with NASA and build ties with US government stakeholders, academy, and industry. It's with great pleasure that I turn it over to Talal, and thank you again, Talal, for taking this time in your very busy schedule, as well as all of our DSMC members and partners. We're honored today to have many, many DSMC members and partners, to include a former astronaut. We have a representative from SpaceX, from Airbus, from many, many other member companies, too many to list, but we're excited that you're here today. And I'd like to turn it over now to my friend Talal. Please, Talal. Talal, I'm going to fix. It is.
All right, perfect. Yeah, sorry about that.
Talal, it is not Zoom's fault. It's the user error here. So, as my wife likes to say, anything with a power button, don't let me touch it. Please, over to you, Talal.
It's actually my fault. I touched it because my daughter was screaming in the background, and I guess it's a product of the times. So, you know, we're working from home, and actually someone mentioned a few days ago when I was talking to them, are we really working from home or are we living at work? And I can't put it better. I think it's the latter for sure. Expectations have risen in terms of when people think that they can get a hold of you. There's a lot of webinars, and there are benefits to that, but then there are also certain boundaries that we're hoping to adjust to in this new normal that we're all embarking on together. So with that, Matthew, thank you so much for the invitation to be here today, and thank you for rejoining me and making this feel like somewhat a reunion. There are a lot of people over here that I have not had the opportunity to see recently, but I've interacted with either in my embassy days, like you mentioned, or during my work at the space agency, and it's such a pleasure to be back. It's really an honor to be here. And actually, when you mentioned astronaut and someone from SpaceX and Lockheed and Airbus, I'm quite intimidated to be presenting something like what I'm going to present to a group like you, because you're obviously much more familiar in some of your cases than I am with what I'm going to overly simplify. So
just pretend it's you and I today.
Okay, will do. So that might help. Let me just share my screen over here. Screen 2. Another issue is I have too many screens, 4 screens. Can you guys see? Yeah, can you guys see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, let me just full screen it here. All right, so again, I'm flattered to be here with you guys, and I'll try to make this session as valuable and all-encompassing as possible, because obviously different levels of knowledge amongst the audience when I looked at the list. And so I kind of broke it up into five different parts, as Matthew mentioned, the fifth one being the investment impact, but it's connected to the current situation. But first, and what I always like to begin things with is why space? Why space is important, and it's always good to get that question out the way, because there are some people that start to question the importance of investing in a sector that, when there are other potential priorities, including right now with a healthcare crisis that the world is going through. And then, after why space, the UAE's journey within space, and what we've done, since the formation of the space agency, but even prior to the space agency's establishment, what our role in the space industry globally has been. And then the global picture, because it's always good to see where we fit in the global list of things, just to understand better how the UAE's program is trying to complement and contribute to the global picture of space. And then obviously, like I mentioned, the current situation and the investment impact. So typically I always start with this picture and ask a room full of people what countries they see. And generally their first instinct is to turn their heads upside down and think, oh, maybe that's India. Is that India over there that looks upside down? But it's always gratifying to me to get the same sense of awe in the reaction when I tell people that this is actually a picture of ancient Mars. And that's kind of the awe that I had when I first saw this picture in 2014, I think it was. And it was so thought-provoking that it got me interested in beginning to dig the rabbit hole and go through it. And as our DG, Dr. Mohammed Al-Ahbabi puts it, I was infected with the space bug at that time, and I'm still infected, and I'm still digging that rabbit hole as a non-technical, my academic background is international business, and I had no engineering experience whatsoever, but I try to self-learn as much as possible because I love technology, and this is what kind of drew me to that. I try to understand better what I'm hoping to be able to sell in the importance of space. And so if you look at this picture, it shows kind of also the comparison, like a kind of to-scale comparison of Earth and Mars, and how Mars on the bottom right-hand side, how Mars looks today. And notice, there's a polar ice cap over there, and that kind of presents an opportunity for finding life or to generate life. So you're able to melt the ice, and there's water there. Where there's water, there's typically the ability for life to persist. And so what would be very interesting is if we could one day figure out how to reverse this cycle, or understand better what happened to cause this cycle, because those ideas and those kinds of that information, those questions answered, could really potentially help life on Earth. It could help us understand better the impact that climate change has. And many other things. So that curiosity is something that I think space brings, that makes it very interesting for anyone who is trying to solve hard problems. And then you have to also think about what we take for granted in everyday life. The importance of space comes in many different forms. Today, we depend on space for a lot of the different types of things that we do on a daily basis, including navigation, broadcasting, communications. The military depend on it. Earth observation is very useful to understanding things about the planet, both on agriculture, oil and gas. There are many different types of applications for that. Weather prediction is also another very important aspect. So these are things that people don't typically associate with space when you're looking at the actual end use that you're benefiting from, and how each one of our phones has become like a big conduit to the applications that space enables. And so it's good to have that in the back of our minds, in full appreciation of why investment in space is important. Now, there are other very important aspects as well. You look at the spin-offs that come out of investment in space exploration. And here are some examples, a non-exhaustive list, obviously. NASA puts out a very interesting report every year that shows what those spin-offs look like and what they are. But the investments in space have generated things like memory foam, the ear thermometer, shoe insoles, even baby formula. So it's very counterintuitive to think, but those are things that came out. Velcro was another one. Velcro is a very important thing in everyone's life. I think we all have some use for it. And that was really something that was invented for space because of the microgravity conditions. And then you've got a lot of life-saving type of spin-offs that lives depend on in the medical field. MRIs, breast cancer detection, a lot of different things that space investments had contributed to that became ancillary benefits of those investments. This picture over here is very, very cool because this picture is the cargo capsule of SpaceX that was taking up cargo to a resupply mission for the space station recently, and obviously was flying over the UAE and had a UAE experiment in it of date palm trees and the seed of the palm tree, and that experiment was going to be conducted by our astronaut Hazza al-Mansouri. And so it's a really telling picture about the benefits of some of the things you could be doing in space in order to study science. And NanoRacks, who are a big space company based here, that have an operation here in the UAE, that opened an office here in the UAE, helped us get that experiment into orbit to understand better germination of palm tree seeds and how microgravity affects that. Because in the future, you might need to do these types of things in different environments you're trying to settle. So I'll move over to the UAE's journey into space. And as I mentioned, that didn't only begin in 2014 when the agency was established, but rather back in 1976 when our late founder, Sheikh Zayed, Allah yarhamah, met with the Apollo 17 astronauts who were doing a world tour at the time. And from our understanding, because one of our board members actually was in that meeting, Dr. Farouk Al-Baz, who is a very well-renowned NASA geologist, he was there as part of this mission and helped with translating and supporting the conversation. And from what we understand, the questions that were asked by Sheikh Zayed were very inquisitive about the benefits that investing in space could have on Earth, and the benefits of space exploration generally on Earth, and in particular in our part of the world, in our region, where the climate is a certain way, the environment is a certain way. And so that kind of planted the seed for us as a society that space is something important. And years later, there were many efforts in trying to diversify the economy away from hydrocarbons, and there were many efforts in looking at how we would look at comparative and competitive advantages that were enabled by oil and using those to build out different industries with aerospace and with oil and gas, sorry, not oil and gas, but aerospace, aluminum smelting, for example, industry, tourism, and many other types of areas and sectors that the UAE has excelled in to diversify the economy away from hydrocarbons. And so a natural next step at some point down the line became that the space industry could help us yield those same diversification aspects, and also end up inducing a very interesting corollary benefit down the line with human capital development, because it's a very high-tech type of industry, and there'd be a contribution in terms of human capital development that could also end up spilling over into other sectors as well. And so in 1997 was the first real delve into the domain by a company that was established called Thuraya, which does satellite telecommunication equipment, and so they've grown into a much bigger company today than they were back then, and are really global in their footprint, with many different types of customers, both on the military security end as well as the civilian end. And then Yasat in 2007 was established, and also has a global footprint right now. There are 3 satellites in orbit that are serving a huge global footprint, including South America with the last one. And again, broadband, internet, and broadcasting services. So, and some military as well functions. And then in 2006, there was the establishment of the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center, or formerly known as the Emirates Institute of Advanced Science and Technology. And this one was very, very interesting because this was specifically choreographed in a way to try to build capability and accelerate the development of knowledge and technology transfer. And they did it so methodically that I think, we all lean on the experience that they've been able to produce here. And a lot of the individuals that worked on those early programs, there were 2 Earth observation satellites done in partnership with a Korean entity. One was done in Korea with a lot of our engineers that went out there for years. And then the second one was done kind of like 50-50, I would say, between Korea and the UAE. And then Khalifa-Sat was 100% built in the UAE by UAE nationals and launched last year. So a very interesting sequence that was, produced to help generate the talent that we need, that took us to where we are today and where we were in 2014, let's say, when His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the Vice President of the UAE, Prime Minister and ruler of Dubai, mentioned, first of all, that we were establishing a space agency. So that was announced and formalized in 2014. And at the same time, mentioned that we will have a Mars mission. And I usually tell people that this type of a moment was analogous to the Kennedy moonshot speech back when John F. Kennedy, made the commitment that within a certain period of time they were going to reach, the U.S. was going to reach the moon, and the inspiration value that held. But for us, His Highness said, we chose the epic challenge of reaching Mars because epic challenges inspire and motivate us. And so it was really an eye-opening experience for all of us to think that a country as small as ours would not only have a Mars mission, but would need to accelerate our capability development and be able to execute this in a very short time frame to be able to launch it in 2020, because the idea was to have it reach Mars by 2021, which is our 50th year anniversary. And I'm happy to say that we're on track. And despite the current situation, the spacecraft, we had to make some arrangements to have it shipped to the launch site earlier. So it's currently in Japan. We have a team of engineers that have made it to Japan earlier than anticipated. They've gone through the quarantine and they will be there until launch. And we're doing everything in our power to make sure that it goes on schedule. And obviously, this is thanks to a very big international effort with the Japanese government involved, the Russian government, the US government, the transportation that took place, and that effort was a heavy lift. But it's a testament to the relationships we've been able to advance and build since establishing the space agency, and also to the importance of such a program, especially since it's called Hope, and it's there to generate hope. And at a time like this, that's something we can definitely use more of. So again, back to 2014 when this was announced, the agency was established mainly to kind of oversee the sector, coordinate the different sporadic efforts that have been taking place in the sector. You had several different entities, as you can see on the top left over there, that were operating, but with no real regulatory framework that was centralized on a federal overarching level. And so that's where the space agency came in. And in addition to that, we obviously have a missions division that work on projects and help enable universities. We have a policy and law. So we've announced, we've produced a policy, a strategy, and the law since our establishment, and an investment promotion plan as well. There are 10 satellites in orbit and 8 in progress. There's quite a big amount of investment in the sector that's gone in to date. Several R&D space centers that have been established. There's one in Al Ain that was recently established called the National Space Science and Technology Center. Khalifa University are working on formalizing they had the YASAT Space Lab, and that's going to evolve into a space center as well. And obviously that one was the one that was established between YASAT, Orbital ATK at the time, now Northrop Grumman, and Khalifa University. And the space agency was always a key supporter there and a contributor to that. And then university programs that are now increasing with space sciences and space education, even space law and astronomy and different types of disciplines within the space domain. So that's something we're very encouraged with. And then the other thing about the agency is we're all about trying to advance our soft power position globally and ensure that we're supportive of the efforts regionally as well. So in was it last March actually, we announced the formation of the Arab Space Cooperation Group, which includes 14 countries, and we're hoping to continue to grow that. And the idea there is to have a coordinated effort and try to ensure that there's a voice for the Arab world when it comes to space type of issues on multilateral in multilateral fora like the UN, etc. But more importantly, to encourage activities within those respective countries. Some of them do already have activities with regard to space. We're trying to help them further those activities and encourage them. In fact, a lot of them have quite a bit of talent. You look at Saudi Arabia, they recently announced a space agency and they're doing incredible things. And even predating the agency, some of their universities were very active in this domain. Bahrain also announced a space agency not too long ago. And so there's a lot of passion, there's a lot of talent in the region. And so one of the projects that is going to activate this group was a gift by the United Arab Emirates to the group called the 813 satellite, which is a hyperspectral satellite we'll be developing in that center in Al Ain that I mentioned. And it will utilize scientists and engineers from the Arab Space Cooperation Group. So a little bit about the Mars mission that I spoke about. This is obviously a flagship national project for the UAE, and you know, we had a very short period of time to be able to put together what we needed to do to get it to where it is today. And we couldn't have done it alone. There were partners involved, but it was a UAE national project management team all along. And that's what we're most proud of, that they really worked very, very hard on trying to ensure that they learned as much as possible in the process, and they actually worked on some new innovative processes and instruments to bring this project to fruition. And so there are three main instruments that are going to be on this orbiter, an infrared spectrometer, an imager, and an ultraviolet spectrometer. And this is basically going to take measurements of the Martian atmosphere and understand better the global Martian weather picture to answer some questions that were unanswered in the past and help us move forward into a direction where we could understand better the atmospheric composition and how you could potentially in the future adapt to it or manipulate it in a way so that you could have human settlements down the line on Mars. And that's in line with the strategy that the UAE government has called Mars 2117, which is a 100-year plan to build a habitable settlement on Mars. And obviously, this isn't something that we're going to do on our own. So this is going to be really a critical demonstration of how partnerships could be choreographed with like-minded, not only nations and other space agencies, but industry as well, to help bring this type of idea to fruition. And you know, if people ask all the time, what's the fixation with Mars? And to us, it's the curiosity that it drives based on some of the things I mentioned earlier, but also the same challenges that we kind of see would need to be solved for Mars that could potentially end up yielding some interesting solutions for the same challenges we have here on Earth, energy, food, and water being three of them. So all the projects that we have right now, including the Mars mission, including our human spaceflight program, are kind of positioned in that form to show how we would be able to, at some point in the future, live and work on Mars. So our human spaceflight program, like I mentioned, is something we're also extremely proud of. The Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center kind of lead the human spaceflight program for the UAE, and they have an astronaut corps of 2 right now. Both Hazza al-Mansouri and Sultan al-Niyadi came out of a group of 4,000 applicants at the time. A third were women, and you know, they were down selected over the course of a year. They went through rigorous training, and then Hazza ended up becoming the primary, and Sultan was his backup. Hazza went to the space station in September of 2019 for a short duration mission. And he's a rock star right now. He's a celebrity over here. He's definitely someone that is extremely inspirational to us all. And not to mention the value that brings to kids around the UAE, wanting to be like him. And that was something we saw in the second round of the astronaut call, which also generated over 4,000 applicants. And we should be selecting another 2 astronauts by January of next year to join the UAE astronaut corps. But during his time at the space station, he did many different types of things, lots of experiments. I think there were about 16 experiments or so. And also in the bottom right picture, he had the chance to host a UAE night where UAE cuisine was featured. And I heard that was a big hit amongst the other astronauts because of the spices and everything that they were able to enjoy there. But this was really a way that we were able to execute on the vision of our late founder and bring that dream into realization. And it doesn't stop there. The idea is this is going to be a sustainable human spaceflight program. So it's not a one-off mission. This was not a tourism type of mission. This was something with real science and a real objective that we were after, and we're hoping to grow that in the future. Now, you may ask, why is the UAE doing this? What's the benefit? And you know, apart from everything else we discussed, there are all those benefits, but then there's another one as well that sometimes gets. So I'll recap some of the benefits that I mentioned just to make sure we're all on the same page. The Middle East and North Africa is a huge area with about 1/3 of the world's population. 50% are under the age of 25. And there's a high level of unemployment. There is a lack of sometimes a sense of purpose and hope, which we are hoping to solve with the space the space industry by encouraging STEM education and allowing people to exercise that ability in practice, hopefully in their respective countries or even in collaboration with us, like under the Arab Space Cooperation Group. And so this is one of the main reasons, in addition to the two that I mentioned earlier, which are obviously diversifying the economy and contribution to science, technology development, and the human knowledge base when it comes to space. So here's an example of a competition that we had with Boeing called Genes in Space. It was with Boeing and the National at the time and the UAE Space Agency, where a young 14-year-old girl, Ali Al-Mansouri, who's on the right-hand side of this picture, won the competition and was able to send an experiment to space looking at heat shock proteins and how they express themselves in microgravity. I mean, I remember when I was 14 years old, what I was doing, I was probably playing video games and stuff. And here's a girl that was working with Harvard mentors on putting together this project, because for her, she always wanted to be an astronaut. And she didn't like how spacesuits looked. So she wanted to try to figure out how the convergence between genetic modification, CRISPR technology, and all these types of things in the future might converge with where we're going space exploration-wise. And if you can manipulate genes from the inside out rather than protect from the outside in, you might not need spacesuits. So this is the type of mindset and mentality we have in our youth. And we want to see more examples of Ali Al-Mansouri. And so this is one of the key drivers behind why we are doing what we do, and the spillover we're hoping to have in the rest of the region, because it's the benefit of everyone globally. So again, now the global picture. This is important because it shows where we kind of fit. But a little bit of context first. Space is hard. Everyone says space is hard, or it's not rocket science, or I mean, you hear that all the time. But if you break it down, the reason space is hard is because obviously the physics is difficult. It's difficult to get anything out of Earth's gravity well. And so you need to adhere to a certain formula. So it's actually not as hard as people make it seem. You just need to figure out what needs to happen to be able to put a rocket into orbit. And we're very lucky on Earth with the strength of gravity we have that this is possible. And so we've seen rockets go into orbit, but they cost a lot of money. And there's a lot of waste as well. I mean, if you look at this part over here, that's the only thing that's valuable that's going into space. Everything else is just to try to get that thing into space. So whatever it is, a spacecraft or a human capsule, whatever it might be, and whatever its mission might be, however long it needs to be out there, and whether it needs to come back or not, it has to be able to perform all that autonomously, and it has to be able to do that without any refueling, for instance. And the inefficiency is that all this part over here, including the engines, are usually expendable and get thrown away. And so the cost, that's what pushes the cost to be so high. And then the forcing function market-wise is very limited as well. You look at the different industries, communication, broadcasting, military, and remote sensing. That's not enough to have governments spend on trying to find efficiencies. There's a process that works, and there were many entities that were able to adhere to those, to make it happen, to make it work. But in recent years, we've kind of gotten into a paradigm shift with commercial space, making it a lot more accessible. But before I get into that, I'll tell you a little bit about how difficult it is and how counterintuitive sometimes these things are. So to get to low Earth orbit, which is only that distance, you need to be traveling at 8 kilometers per second to achieve orbit. And it costs about $8,000 per kilogram to get anything there. To get to the moon, it costs about $1.2 million per kilogram, and it takes 14 kilometers per second. But it also only takes 2 kilometers per second to get off the moon because the gravity there is a lot less. And here's the same thing for Mars, 2.7 million per kilogram, and 16 kilometers per second to get there, 5 kilometers per second to get off. Asteroids, no delta V needed to get off, but they're much further than the 53 million kilometers that Mars is in. So what's interesting about this picture is that this is probably the most intensive part of the mission when it comes to expending your resources, in this case, the amount of energy required, and by virtue of that, the cost. So if you get to low Earth orbit, you're kind of halfway into anywhere in the solar system that you need to be. And so it is conceivable that it might make more sense to go to an asteroid and come back than go to the moon and come back in terms of the amount of delta V you save. And that's counterintuitive to many, and that's why it's important to understand the orbital dynamics and why space is so difficult and why it's an amazing challenge to work on. But again, now the commercial industry has started to come up with very innovative approaches to reducing the cost and increasing access to space. Let me just see how I'm doing on time here.
I think you're doing great on time, Talal, and you're getting to one of our favorite Virgin Galactic. A lot of news about Virgin Galactic IPO. It's one of Abu Dhabi's large investments. So this is getting into some of the detail in the UAE about the global trend, but the local impact.
Right. Yeah. So it's a very interesting one because obviously we do have a relationship through one of our investment vehicles in Virgin Galactic, and at some point down the line, it's conceivable that if the economics make sense, they might be able to operate remotely from New Mexico, where they are currently, and the UAE might be an interesting destination for them to have some operations as well.
I've been asking, where is our spaceport Al Ain for a couple of years. I'm waiting for George Whitesides to tell us the opening date.
Yeah, we're working on things, so hopefully stay tuned is what I can say.
You will.
But Virgin Galactic, as well as a lot of other players in the industry, and this is not an exhaustive list or set of pictures, but Blue Origin, SpaceX, and many other kinds of smaller companies that are really interested in trying to increase access to space and reduce cost. And the interesting part of reusability, when you're landing the booster stage of rockets, like in the case of SpaceX today, they've already reduced the cost of access, and they've proven reliability, and they're able to monetize that in a way that can compete with the traditional methods and change the dynamic. So think of it as, you have a platform now, and there are much more ideas of what can be built on top of that platform because of what this type of a situation can allow for. And then, there are other companies that are looking at ways that you would mine asteroids, and people would ask, okay, what's the importance? Why would you want to do something like that? And it's fascinating to see even one of the a certain sized asteroid can have more platinum than has ever been mined on Earth, or more water than has ever flowed on the Niagara Falls. And so these are things that are very interesting. And it's not about trying to bring those resources back to Earth. I don't think that would yield itself to any efficiency. I think it's about trying to figure out how these things can be used to avoid taking things from Earth that you would need in space to continue to develop and build settlements. So you could think of what they call in situ resource utilization, using the resources that are in space for your to augment your missions in space and minimize the cost penalty of taking things from Earth. And the future holds some very interesting things that we can look forward to. I mean, this is an actual picture. It looks like an artist's rendition or something, but an actual picture of SpaceX's Starship that they're developing. And this is only the upper stage of it. There's a whole other probably twice the size of this part that goes underneath it that will need to be developed to get them to make this conduct what they're looking to conduct. And it's a huge system. They're building on the heritage they have and the experience that they have in landing and reusability, so they can have a 100% reusable system. Other companies as well that are playing in this space that are also spending a lot of money, Blue Origin being one. You look at these three teams that have won lunar contracts for Artemis with the US recently. This team in particular over here, the Blue Origin, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Draper, the amount of innovation that's going to come out and be spurred by these types of efforts are huge. And the platforms that they're developing are going to be something that entrepreneurs of tomorrow are going to be able to build on top of. So it's really interesting stuff. Now, we can't talk about anything in terms of the future without addressing the current situation, and that's the elephant in the room, which is the COVID crisis and the pandemic that we're currently living through. And the space industry, like every other industry, has been affected by this, and the effects have taken on different forms. And I'll try to go through some of these just to give you some context. So there have been some bankruptcies, there have been some layoffs, there have been some postponed events like the one we were supposed to have over here from the IAC in October. And all these are impacts. But in many of the cases, at least with the companies that have had some financial difficulties, it's been a product of other situations that were happening prior to the pandemic that might have been accelerated by the pandemic. And you couple that with the reluctance of VC to take any risks while they are trying to understand better what the situation might bring. And financial restructuring, as it is with bankruptcy, might be a good thing for some of these companies. Some of them might come out even stronger. So it's not different than many other industries and the hardships that they're facing. But with the space industry, the difference is that the space industry has traditionally been more focused on government contracts and government spending. And so that part, I think, will kind of either remain the same or increase to a certain extent because of the benefits it yields. But we're seeing some interesting trends as well. A lot of people working from home. You actually have people flying CubeSats from home. You have satellite data that's being helpful in mitigating some of the issues that we're seeing with the pandemic. I saw this yesterday. People maneuvering the Curiosity rover on Mars from home. I mean, think of, you have a pet cat that goes over your keyboard and stuff, how that could potentially impact some of the maneuvers. But this is the reality of the situation. We're learning how to adapt and do things in a different way. And the other thing that I've seen, which I'm really, really impressed by and encouraged by, is the repurposing that some companies have taken with the manufacturing lines they have. This is also consistent with the defense industry and the aerospace industry. But in the space industry, we have many examples of companies, including Virgin Orbit, SpaceX, Blue Origin, ULA, and many others, as well as NASA, looking at how they can either make PPE or personal protective equipment, ventilators, and other things with the experience that they have and the manufacturing facilities they have. In fact, if you take note of this, the Global Satellite Industry and COVID-19 report, you can just Google that. There's a 6-page report that goes into, in granular details, what each company in the space and satellite industry are doing to help with the pandemic. There are also a few good surveys out. A lot of surveys are going around. This is one of them that's trying to get a pulse on the situation and understand better the impression and where people think from the industry things are going to go. So it's going to help us get, as a barometer, get to an understanding of what might need to happen to continue to adapt depending on how long the situation lasts. And then another interesting area that I found is looking at images from space and seeing physically the impact that this pandemic has caused with the quarantining situation and remote working and things of that nature. These are pictures from the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center of Rome, one close-up version and one zoomed out, showing a place that's usually heavily congested and how empty it is. And you see this in many places. This is Mecca. This is somewhere in the south of Italy, I think. So you can see that shift in activity. There are even some interesting commercial companies like ISI here that have synthetic aperture radar, and you can actually see ships that are stranded or anchored in the Atlantic, cruise ships, because of the situation. So, and these applications are interesting, both on the remote sensing side with optical, because you can monetize that to a great degree, and here with synthetic aperture radar right now being more commercial. Traditionally, it's only been kind of in the military realm, but the granularity that they're able to produce have a lot of use cases that could be useful, both for the pandemic and otherwise in terms of applications. And then here's one that I really, really enjoy. I mean, in my opinion, this pandemic led to this kind of unsolicited worldwide experiment that emphasizes the value of satellite technologies and what it can produce in terms of data. And this type of information can help guide policy decisions into the future. If you look at pictures of LA and pictures of China, where you typically see a lot of smog, you can actually physically see the reduction of that. But then with certain satellites, you're able to even measure the greenhouse gases emissions or the nitrogen dioxide pollution and how that's dropped in comparison to similar observations that were made during the recession in 2008, for example. So you're able to actually see the difference that human-induced actions can have on climate change for the first time ever because of this unsolicited experiment. And so moving forward, the policies that are formulated around climate change could use these data points as facts rather than speculation on the human impact to climate change. So that's another area that space can be supportive in deriving data for. And then lastly, I have the space investment side of things and how that's going to be impacted. So if you think pre-COVID, the global space economy, according to a report from Bryce, was $360 billion in 2018. And if you zoom into that, a big percentage of it, I think about 22% of the global space economy was contributed to by government budgets. And so startups have also attracted venture capital and angel investing at around 5.7 billion in 2019, I think it was. And that was kind of largely driven by investors continuing to pour large amounts of capital into a handful of the industry's largest companies, like the SpaceX's, et cetera. But also a lot of the smaller companies that are building applications over those big, large platforms have benefited from it. And so in terms of launch, it's only a very small, it might be the most prevalent one that we all see. It's the most visible and the one that we associate space investments with the most, but it's a very small component in that overall picture. It's that 6.2 billion over there that you see in the green towards the left. And so, you know, and there's a proliferation of small sat launch companies that are out there. And arguably, even before the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about potential consolidation or a shakeoff happening because there's an oversupply and an overcapacity to a certain extent if all of them were to succeed. But the innovation that's coming out of those efforts are great. And the ideas that are being generated to build on top of those platforms are going to be what ends up being a lot more bankable, I think, to VCs today. But a few reports that were made in the last couple of years by Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and Bank of America had one common theme, and that's if you look at historic growth of 7% per year that was observed between 2007 and 2015 in the space industry, and you extrapolate that into the future, their projections were that it'll be anywhere between $1 to $3 trillion as an industry in 2030 or 2040 timeframe. And I don't think a lot of that ends up changing because of the situation. Now, whether those are accurate types of projections or not is a different question. But I don't think the sentiment in terms of the importance of the sector and the value that it produces changes because of the pandemic. So there are many different companies and working on so many different, it's like in the oil and gas, you have upstream and downstream, and it's the same thing with space. With upstream, you have some launch vehicles, you have satellite space hardware, and these companies might be a little bit more affected in the near term. But then on the downstream side, you have the analytical companies, geospatial analytics, you have Earth observation companies, and those might actually flourish and prosper in this type of situation. You can even think to the smaller companies that are pre-revenue, let's say. The pre-revenue companies have an amazing opportunity right now to either pivot or repurpose in a way their objective no opportunity cost, and start focusing on something that could be useful to the pandemic and acquire talent at much cheaper costs than they would have otherwise in normal times. So there are some advantages to smaller companies. So the key takeaways here are government spending are a key contributor to the space economy globally. And I don't see that stopping completely. I think, on the contrary, it might end up being something that increases, arguably showing the benefit and the inspiration value and the hope that we all need, plus the benefits that the technologies themselves could induce. The second thing is angel investors and VCs. I think we will see a reduction of the amount of angel investing and VC money going into the space industry, just simply because they're, they might be reprioritizing. But I would maybe segregate that to the angel investors and the VCs that were in the space industry to begin with, not as a key focus. They were in other industries as well. The ones that were focused on space are going to continue to look for the low-hanging fruit and the key opportunities to take advantage of this situation and grow their portfolio companies. The platform versus application aspect, as I mentioned a couple of times, is very important to keep in mind as well. There was a nice report that the Space Fund put together, a company in the US, that looked at the correlation to global markets of the space industry and how uncorrelated they were. That was the conclusion. And they looked at data points from the recession in 2008 and then from 2008 to 2019 and how it's not really correlated to global markets. So we shouldn't really feel that because the markets are down, the space industry is going to be affected automatically. There are so many different dynamics here at play. I mentioned about early stage startups potentially benefiting, and then technology trends are going to continue to be something that even, I think, especially in a situation like this, are going to be invested in. And so there are lots of commercial new space firms that peg their future success on customers from some of the hardest hit industries like airlines or maritime and logistics, and on continued venture capital. I mean, those are going to be affected, but it's not the end of the road for them. There could be financial restructuring situations in play, and there could be repositioning and repurposing and some pivots that are made to help weather the storm, so to speak. Imagery analytics firms are always going to try to find ways to produce value out of what they have. And again, I think in some ways the current stress on the sector is accelerating what was an inevitable kind of market correction that was overdue due to too much capital and funding and the overcapacity of supply. So it might be a good thing in retrospect when we look back at this time to see somewhat the correction taking place, and hopefully most companies weathering through that as well. So yeah, that's kind of my takeaway, or what I'd like you to take away from this. And I think we're at the 40-minute dot, so I want to make sure that I turn it over and pause there for a second to answer any questions you might have.
Well, thank you very much. This has been a very insightful presentation. If we can ask everyone to please turn on your camera if you would like to ask a question, use your raise the hand function. So that we see you. We have a number of questions that have come in. Thank you very much for those that have been sending them in as we've been going along here. We really appreciate the participation. While we're waiting for those to come online, please remember, by the way, to give your name and the organization that you're with before you ask your question. The first question we've received is, with SpaceX launching in 9 days the first commercial space launch vehicle for humans, what's at stake for the industry?
Yeah, it's a significant milestone. If you think to where SpaceX was 10, 15 years ago and where they are today, it's an incredible journey that they've been on, and what they've been able to unilaterally kind of force in terms of change in the industry and change in the mindset of people of what could be, what is possible and what's not possible. It's something they should definitely be very proud of. What it changes for the industry is it just shows that sheer talent and perseverance can yield some incredible results. They are single-handedly helping unlock an interesting future and market for the space industry that everyone else is going to be able to benefit from. And so, yeah, I mean, from our vantage point here in the UAE, we look at that and we're inspired, and we're constantly. And I think Omar might be here from SpaceX. It's like 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. where he is in LA joining. And we're very close to the team over there, trying to ensure that we keep each other abreast of our different programs and see where we can be synergetic and hopefully find where our paths can cross.
Well, and I think you mentioned, in fact, earlier in your presentation, how working virtually is actually now testing out the communication platforms that were once maybe used only in command and control centers are now being used in people's kitchen tables to move these landers. So it is an interesting time, and I know that you're often traveling and very busy on a plane. I know that many times when we've connected, you're either en route someplace or coming back home to the UAE. You touched upon the environmental impact, and really what this is at this time, we have a unique opportunity to test technologies in space. Can you talk a little bit more about that environmental impact? We've had a number of questions regarding that subject and your slide on Beijing. And I think people would enjoy more clarity on that.
Yeah, I wish I was an expert in the area, but like I mentioned, I think the fact that you can now demonstrably show and measure certain data points that are produced from space observations with respect to and comparatively look at the impact that the post-quarantine world can see versus what was happening traditionally, I think that is a very powerful tool. And there are many different types of sensors. Obviously, I'm not too privy on. I think greenhouse gas measurements. There's carbon dioxide measurements and other things that can be indicators that would help shape future policy in this area. So to me, that's the interesting part. The fact that this is a real-time experiment that we're all undergoing, that space can contribute to helping advance policy on. And so, yeah, I thought I'd throw that example in there just as a potential benefit, because many people might think space exploration would be only good for a certain aspect. But here's one use case that I think everyone would benefit from if we had clear data and policies that are driven by clear data.
Well, and that actually leads us to the next question we've received, and that is, what are your thoughts on the COVID-19 pandemic accelerating the exploration of space for the survival of the species?
Yeah, wow.
Question.
It's a good question, absolutely. I mean, you think about it, I don't like to sound too dystopic or cynical, right? So it's very tough to answer a question like that and not think you have to take into consideration that Earth has had 5 existential threats since its inception 4 billion years ago, some of which were asteroid impacts like the one that took out the dinosaurs who were here for 3 million years, and some that were climate type with ice ages and things of that nature. And, the space industry it could be helpful in at least seeing these things and observing them, but we need to do our part in trying to avoid them, right? Like we need to be able to deflect an asteroid, not just see it coming. So there's a lot of investment that needs to be made for planetary protection on many different levels, I think, and these are things that people are working on. But if you look at it as just the Plan B option, it's not the absolutely necessary driving function behind why we would use space exploration. The key here is one thing. I mean, it's difficult to look at a technology that would go and try to deflect an asteroid, although people are working on that. But there are certain things we are doing that are negatively impacting the climate on the planet. And if we can change those, and that would help take out one of the potential human-induced existential threats, and that would be a great outcome. So that's kind of how I look at it. I'm inspired by the vision of trying to see how we could settle different places in a new frontier like space. That to me is very, very powerful. And I think, the people that were trying to think about crossing the Atlantic from Europe back in the day and then building a railroad from the east coast of the US to the west coast of the US, they all had these types of ideas as well, and those inspirations, because there are so many opportunities that we don't even know about right now. And you can't for someone like myself who's trying to work the investment angle and try to unlock the economic potential, we're in this catch-22 type of situation right now where we don't know the chicken or the egg. How do we generate the demand if we don't have the ability to go there and access the demand? And if we have the ability, if there is a demand, we need to access it. So that's the kind of thing that inspires me. That's the challenge that I want to try to help move the needle on, so to speak.
We have time for just a couple more questions. We have a live question from L3 Harris. L3 Harris, I'm going to unmute you. Please turn on your camera, give your name and the organization that you're with.
I don't have a camera here. It's pretty early in the US. So I'm just going to ask my question verbally, if that's okay. My name is Waqar Zaidi. I'm with L3 Harris. I had a question for Talal, and that is, with all these objects launching into space and just kind of exponentially increasing over the next decade or so, what are your thoughts on space traffic management and space sustainability?
Yeah. Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you for getting up so early to watch this. I hope you knew it was recorded and you just did this knowingly. I'm sorry it's so early. I know the guys in LA, same thing. The question is a good one, and it is one that we think of constantly. We have, within our policy and our strategy, addressed the issue of space debris. We have a definition for it in our law. We are working very closely with the UN Office of Outer Space on trying to ensure that we have we embrace responsible actions for our operators and encourage that globally in our with whatever platform we have, based with the Arab Space Cooperation Group or in our voice at the UN. So there are some intricacies. I can offline maybe send you some of the things we've already done and thought through on this basis. And in the next few months, you'll also hear about a few initiatives that we have that might be very interesting to this area as well of space traffic management and space debris. But it's a very important issue. It affects everyone and affects access to space generally.
Talal, we have time just for two more quick questions. The second to last question here comes from Adam Fairbrother. Adam asks, how well placed is the UAE for growth of space industry in terms of local talent, both currently and looking forward in the future?
Yeah, I'd say very well placed. Very well placed because we have some incredible support from the leaders in the country and the vision that they've set for us. The hard job for us is to try to execute on that vision. The good thing about what we've been able to do here is that you know that vision is long term, like that 100-year plan. So it's not subject to a cyclical government shift or a different type of dynamic that might come from one year to another. It's a consistent, it's an ultimate objective that everything else has to fall into place behind. And in terms of human capital development, the interest and the inspiration value that our space program has generated with the youth has been overwhelmingly positive. And we're looking to try to take full advantage of that in the space industry to ensure that they pursue careers that are useful. And it's not only discipline based on space and engineering and technologies, but all disciplines. Anyone who's interested in space can end up serving in this industry. I'm a living example of that.
That brings us to the last question, and this is from a veteran expat who says, in my home country, I won't mention the country he asked me not to, we've shown a lack of leadership around space, but in the UAE, they've been able to accomplish decades worth of advancements in a very short time. Can you highlight, Talal, we only have a few minutes left, how important has it been that the UAE's leadership has been pushing for a UAE space program?
Yeah, it's been very important. I mean, we needed a platform to help us advance the UAE's interest in space, and so the agency's establishment was a key contributor to that. And it's all the product of the visionary leadership by everyone from the President, His Highness Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed, the Prime Minister and Vice President Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed in Abu Dhabi. But if you look at even the team at the agency on a board and leadership level, you know, His Excellency Dr. Ahmed bin Hol, our chairman, is the Minister of State for Higher Education. So it's a very interesting relevance there that's tied in, because we're trying to ensure that we're developing the talent we need. He's also in charge of the advanced skills portfolio within the government, and that's a testament of the government's support and encouragement to the sector. And our Director General, His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Al-Ahbabi, same thing, someone who has been working on the space portfolio in the UAE, predating the space industry here, the space agency, sorry, here. And his leadership, their leadership collectively inspires us, and their vision sets the bar really high. And what we need to do is just deliver and execute. So it makes our job much more focused than I would say in comparatively some other places that I've seen, who are hopefully going to benchmark us like we benchmark them. And I'm proud to say that we are being benchmarked by so many other places right now that are establishing space agencies, and some that are established space agencies as well, coming to learn some of the from the experiences we have.
Talal, I thank you very much, Talal Kasi, the UAE Space Agency, the leadership of the UAE. Today's presentation has been very, very helpful, and I know that you've encouraged people to follow up directly, to let them let you know how they might be able to be a part of that. Do you have any final words?
No, just to say that I am really honored to be here with you, and I really appreciate the invitation, Matthew. And I want everyone to know that I'm accessible. So if anyone needs to ask me any question, please reach out to Matthew. He can put you in touch with me. And again, I really enjoyed this, and I appreciate those who have had to dial in from different time zones where it wasn't the most convenient thing to do. I really appreciate you taking the time and being here with us.
Talal, thank you so much. And I'd like to thank all the DSMC members. Thank you very much for the continued support. DSMC is here for you during this time. As we are always, please reach out to us if you require any additional information and or support. As a reminder, our next presentation, more details will be coming out. We will have a presentation from the ICT Fund in June, and we are all looking forward to that. Again, our thanks to Talal, to the UAE Space Agency. We'd like to wish everyone a safe end to Ramadan, and also a very happy Eid Mubarak. We'd like to wish you all a good holiday next week. Stay safe, stay well, and stay strong. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.